Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Dino. Well, it is absolutely frosty out there today. It's about -14 here, Celsius in Niagara Falls, Ontario. But I'm right in the middle of a project working on my DR650. Now, I have the carburetor out of the bike, but today I am going to install the ProCycle Jet kit. I'm going to set the float valve height, and I'm going to even adjust the cable free play on the throttle because it is a little bit interesting the way to do that. And well, you know what? I'm even going to lube the cables, which is something I don't often do. So why don't you sit back, grab yourself something warm to drink and enjoy Dino's Tinker Shed. Coffee, coffee, coffee. I love coffee. See you soon. Well, it really is chilly out here in the shop. If you hear a little bit of hissing in the background, that's my propane heater that's just trying to bring the shed up to temperature. It's probably about 10 degrees Celsius in here right now. And once I'm done this scene, I'll probably turn on another heater just to keep it rocking. But you know, I've had this ProCycle Jet kit in my possession since late summer, so a few months now, with the intention of putting it in over the winter. And the reality is I have the carburetor already out of the motorcycle. So if you're interested in knowing how to do that, I'll see if I can leave a link in the description or maybe a box or something around here. I've never done that yet. I'll see if I can do that. And I would encourage you to have a look at that video first. And in that video, we take the carburetor out, we take it apart. I show you all the different pieces that are inside of it, and we clean it up and put it back together, in preparation obviously for the jet kit. Now, you do not necessarily have to take the carburetor out of the bike. I have seen videos where people simply take the choke and throttle cables off, loosen the band clamps, and they can actually pivot the carburetor to a point where they can get the float bowl off, gain access to the main jet, drill out the pilot jet cap, pull that off, and then turn the carb the other way and change out the needle valve. So that is an option if you don't want to pull the carburetor out. It is a little bit, or can be a little bit frustrating getting it out and getting it back in, and I'll do my best to show you how I've done that without having to take all the air box out. So the first video shows you how to get the carburetor out of the bike. This one will show you how to get it back into the bike. Now, being the winter right now, I'm going to have a bit of a tough time tuning it. I'm just actually reading here in the instructions on how to do that. So I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to warm the bike up enough to set the idle with the mixer screw and the idle screw, but testing it to see whether the main jet is rich enough or too rich requires me actually being out and riding the bike. It gives you all kinds of instructions here on how to do that. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to wait until there's some nicer weather to actually tune the bike. So I'll get it to a point where it's back together, and then in the future we'll run through the tuning process on the jet kit itself when the weather's warm enough. And that could even be in late January. Sometimes we get enough of a thaw around here that riding is possible, although I don't like to do it because of the salt on the road. It gets all over the bike. Okay. So I think that sort of brings us up to speed on what we're going to do. Why don't we get started by reassembling the jet kit into the carburetor? Okay, let's get started. One of the things I really like about this ProCycle kit is how well laid out the instructions are. The first thing it tells you to do is get a manual. I mean, I really like these people. They're really good. So I referred to my manual quite a bit actually through this process. So you want to keep it handy. Now as you travel down, you're going to see that it comes with 3 different jets. One for sort of the stock exhaust here, which is what I'm using, but also the free flow exhaust and a wide open race exhaust if that's sort of the kind of tune you're looking for. Now it also comes with a really good sheet with different diagrams, different figures to show you exactly what they're talking about in the instructions. And I refer to that quite a bit.
Now the kit itself comes in this really heavy duty bag for protection, and when you lay it out, you'll see here's the fuel mixture screw, which is really what I'm mostly interested in. It comes with a new spring, a new washer, and a new O-ring for that. And that whole part is what's going to help me with my idling issues. It comes with 2 O-rings for the float, and I think these are Viton, I think is what they're made out of. It comes with a drill bit and a screw for removing the plug that covers the stock fuel mixture screw, 4 brand new fasteners, and of course it comes with a new needle jet. And this one's adjustable. It has, I think, 5 different slots here, which you use this E-clip and this spacer. And of course, here's your 3 jets, a 145, a 150, and a 155. So the whole kit's about $100. Now to get this plug out, you're going to use the drill bit and this screw, and this will gain you access to the factory fuel mixture screw. So to do this, we're going to have to first drill this cap out, and you don't want to go too deep. So I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape here and just make sort of a little bit of a visual stop so I don't drill too deep. And then using the drill, I'm just going to gently and slowly drill through this cap, stopping every once in a while to see my sort of results. You don't want to over drill, or you'll end up actually drilling into the fuel mixture screw that's hidden underneath this cap. Now, once you finally break through the cap itself, well, the next step is going to be to install that screw into the top. So I'm just about through here. You'll kind of see I just punched through. I did this in real time so you could see how long it really takes. And now I'm through. So I'll just brush off the chips that I've made here. And you can see I still have the float bowl on because I don't want any of these chips to get into any of the orifices that I've just cleaned. So here's the screw, and it just uses a Phillips head, and you screw this in until it's sort of, you feel that it stops on its own. It'll be pretty obvious to you. Then I just clamp a set of vice grips onto the sort of the shaft of the screw itself, for lack of a better term, and then for better purchase I lay it on its side, and oh, out comes the plug. And that's what the plug looks like. You'll have a hard time getting it off that screw if you really wanted to keep it. And if you look down inside, you can see the factory mixture screw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually count how many revolutions that it takes to bottom this out. It should be about 1, but in reality it's only 3/4 of a turn. So this was really lean, and this is probably why I was having really bad cold starting issues. So now I'll just back the actual screw itself out, and you just kind of turn it out and it will come right out. Now there is a spring in there, a washer, and an O-ring that has to come out. You need to get those out before you put the new things in. So I'm just going to use a small dental pick to do that. And you can see that they've come out, and here they are, the factory components right here in comparison to the aftermarket stuff here. So it's really good. It's a nice kit. Everything seems to be really well made and high precision, so I'm quite happy with it. So I'll assemble this, and it's a little tricky to get the O-ring on because it is tight, so I just kind of roll it down there. And finally, that's the completed assembled fuel mixture screw. So I'm just going to set it down in here, and I like to tip up the body of the carburetor so the O-ring never falls off, and gently thread this in by hand until you feel it bottom out. Once it bottoms out, we're just going to back it out half, 1, 1.5, 2, and we're done. Now I'm going to take off the float bowl, and you remember I already broke these fasteners free before we started this process. It just lifts off, and I'll set it to the side, and then I'll just grab the float assembly and pull straight up, and it comes off. I'm going to use a pick. I think I'll use the dental pick here, but a machinist's pick, like the one below the dentist pick, works well too. And basically I'm just going to gently feed this underneath and pull this O-ring off. Now I could probably just be really aggressive here, but this float assembly is kind of delicate. Now you can see that the new O-rings are on the bottom and the old ones are on the top here. So I'll just pick them up and roll these onto the actual standoffs here. So you basically just hold them on one side and roll them over the top. It's pretty easy. Now once this is done, reassembling the float or reinstalling the float is really quite easy. I stand the carburetor back up and I put the float assembly over top of the orifices and then pushing straight down. So the small pipe's easy because you can get right on top and it snaps right in really well, but the back one was just a little bit hard to get in. Normally this drops in pretty easy, but the new O-ring might be just a slight bit bigger. So I pushed as much as I could, and finally I got a very small screwdriver and just pushed straight down right on top of the O-ring, and that seemed to work. You really need to make sure that these little tabs on the side here bottom out on the carburetor body, or you'll never get your float set right. It is critical to get the height of the float set right, so I am going to use this gauge that I bought for $25 on Amazon. Now the way this thing works is it has these two adjustable legs that sit on the on the bottom of the carburetor body, and then this foot that measures the height of your actual float itself. So basically you would set it on the carburetor body like this, and then that foot will give you the reference height for the float itself. Now, I'm not really trusting the accuracy of this gauge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my vernier here to 14.7 millimeters. My battery's just about dead. That's why you can't read it. But this stick out here, I will use to register on the bottom of the gauge and set that foot exactly 14.7 millimeters. That's pretty good like that. Next, I am going to set the carburetor up on its end, and using my left hand and my index finger, I am going to cycle the float and keep an eye on the gap between the float tang and the top of the needle valve here. When it just touches like that, that is where you are going to want to hold the float with your finger. You can see I'm about 1 millimeter too low here. So I'm going to have to actually bend that little metal tab right here. You take the float out to do this, but basically that little metal tab gets bent either into the carburetor body to raise the floats or pushed out to lower the floats. And you're going to do this probably a couple times because you just very, very little measurements to change it, but eventually you're going to get it. I know you will. Okay, it's now time to install the main jet. So I'll pull the factory jet out of the body using a good quality screwdriver here. Again, this is the factory jet, so this is a Mikuni 140. I'll just set it aside on the bench. I'll dig through the pack here until I find the 145 jet, which is what ProCycle recommends for a bike like mine with no modifications on the exhaust. So thread this in by hand and then use your screwdriver to firmly snug this down. You don't have to over tighten this. It's not a Herculean thing here. Next we can put the float bowl back on using the new hardware. Now this new hardware is really nice. One thing I would caution is you can really over tighten these with an Allen key. You don't need to. They just need to be snug. Good, we're ready to go. For me, removing the needle begins by clamping the body of the carburetor in my vise very, very gently. But because we actually broke the fasteners free, it doesn't need a lot of force. These come out really, really easy. It's just keeping it in position. Now remember, the cap itself is spring-loaded, so when you take that final fastener out, it's going to want to get away on you. Now make sure that when you take out the return spring, that the little plastic thing's on the bottom, and don't forget to keep an eye on that little O-ring. Now I'm going to gently pull the slide and diaphragm out, and you can see on the bottom of the diaphragm slide is the factory needle. Now to get that out, it's really easy. You just turn the whole assembly over and out it falls, and here's your factory needle. Now I'm going to get out the new ProCycle needle to compare them. And you can see the factory is non-adjustable. It has that little white plastic spacer, and it's much fatter than the actual ProCycle needle. And the ProCycle needle does come with an E-clip and this D-shaped spacer over here. And it's all laid out how this goes together in the instructions. You can see a really good example of how it should look with the spacer on top of the E-clip. And then over here, it gives you pictures of the actual parts. I mean, this is a really good kit. The fourth groove is where you want the E-clip to start in, and you count from the top of the needle down. So I'm going to do that. I'll count down 4 spaces. And then I basically just squeeze the E-clip on with my thumb. You may need to use a pair of pliers, but I think my thumbs are like walnuts now. Now, I didn't get a picture of that D-shaped spacer going on the top of the clip, but it does fit on the top of the clip. And then you lower the entire assembly into the slide in the center larger hole. Once that's done, I'm going to keep an eye on that O-ring again. I can reassemble the spring, and I can place the cap back on top. Now remember, this kit comes with some nice new stainless steel cap head screws, but you want to make sure that you don't over torque these things. You're going to be tempted because this Allen key head can really put some good force down. You don't need to. You just need to snug these down enough that the diaphragm seals on top, and you're good to go.
Okay, now that we have the carburetor back assembled in one piece, we have a bit more information that we can put on our tuning chart here. So the first thing we know is the new main jet size, which is 145. Now the pilot jet remains the same at 42.5, but the mixture screw has changed. So as I said, 3/4 of a turn was really lean to begin with. We are going to start with 2 full turns on the new pilot air screw. The float bowl, or the float valve, was recommended to be set at 14.7 millimeters, which is right in between 13.7 and 15.7, and that's what we did. And the needle is set in the 4th position. So this is where we would start our tuning when we get to it. Obviously it's a little bit cold out there to do that, but this is where ProCycle tells you to set everything. It should run and it should idle okay, but we'll be able to adjust all of these things to get it where we really want it. Probably the 2 things that you're going to adjust the most would be your turns on your mixture screw and the needle valve height, whether it's back to 3 or up to 5. That will affect the mid-range performance and how rich it runs in the mid-range. Okay, that's good. I'll probably transfer this into a notebook at some point because I probably won't be able to do the actual field testing for several months by the looks of it. I'll be snowmobiling anyway.
I promised I would oil the cables on this, so I'm going to use this little tool here that I paid like $20 for to do that.
I'm going to use the deceleration cable here as an example. And basically, this thing has a large size, or a large hole on one side and almost no hole on the other side. So what this does is this particular portion fits over the threaded ferrule here, and this seals around your cable. So you basically slide it in like this, tuck the cable down tight, and the key to this is really to tighten both of these. They make these with 1 screw or 2 screws. I think the 2 screw variety is better, but basically you tighten these down so that this aluminum piece is evenly pushed in. Now, I want to bottom this right out nice and tight with the idea that that rubber is going to seal around both the cable and around that ferrule at the top. So I'm going to tighten it down as tight as I can get it and hope this works. Now this small port here is used to insert one of these injector straws. So this just sort of fits in like this. Tighten it in as far as it'll go. And like I said, today I'm going to use some silicone lube and see if this works. So you hook this up to the spray nozzle and let's see if this is going to leak all over or if it's going to lube our cable. There we go.
So you can kind of see that there's a little bit of fluid coming out there. I'm just going to cycle this a little bit. And I can hear it actually coming up through the top of the cable. I'm just giving it little short bursts. And I can actually see it dripping out the top of the cable up there. So that actually works pretty good. I'll do the other one, which might be a little bit more difficult. And then our cables will be nice and lubed and ready to go. Okay, so this cable luber did exactly what it said it would do, and it looks like both my cables are well lubricated now. Anytime you bring one of these things out, you're going to get some discussions, because some people will tell you you absolutely have to lubricate your cables, and other people will bring up a point and say that by lubricating your cables, you're actually attracting dirt into the cable itself, shortening the lifespan of the cable. So this is another one of the cases of synthetic oil versus regular oil, or Ford versus Chevy trucks. It is a matter of preference, and whether you choose to lubricate or not, that's how it's done. Okay, I'll let you make the final decision on whether or not to lubricate. I would think there might be some comments below with different opinions, and that would be interesting to see. Okay, on to the next thing. I'm going to remove the rear band clamp off the snorkel assembly for the airbox to get the carburetor in. And I'm just going to massage it a little bit here to make sure it's flexible enough, because it is pretty cold in my shop right now. Next, I'll take the carburetor and I'll insert the large end into that airbox snorkel and push back on it, and it'll snap into place. Now, I found this was the easiest way to do it. I tried a couple different ways. This was by far the easiest and simplest to get it back into place. And there's some locating pins on top of the front snorkel there that it'll all fit and line up. Once you get that, it's just really a matter of reinstalling the band clamp, so it will slide around here. It was a little tricky, but I was able to sort of work it around. And then finally, I just reinstall that one sort of threaded machine screw on the back. Now I'll tighten these back down with that JIS screwdriver, and I'll also tighten the front one up. And be aware, you don't have to over tighten these or you'll actually deform the rubber on those snorkels. Next, I'm going to remove the two screws for the throttle plate, and we'll reinstall that into the bike. So I'll put a little bit of white lithium grease on the cable balls, and I'll reinstall them into the throttle cam here. Once that's done, I'll just reinstall the screws. Now, I didn't use any Loctite on these in case I want to get them back out, but I do think they'll stay in place quite well. They did all summer for me anyway. Good. You can see the throttle is articulating quite well. And you can see here that new mixture screw is really easy to get to. It's right next to your actual idle screw, right next to it here, which look at how nice and clean that is. I'm going to adjust the free play on my cables just to show you how it's done. And it's really odd here. So you start with your deceleration cable, that's the front one, and you're actually measuring the amount of thread that comes out above the lock nut. So for the deceleration cable, it doesn't matter what year it is between 3 and 4 millimeters of thread should be protruding above that nut. Now, for the front, you do the adjustments up here with this barrel adjuster. Now, it's the same kind of thing. We're looking for the amount of thread that sticks past this nut, and you adjust it with this barrel adjuster here. Now, for this particular application, there's two different choices. One is from 96 to 2001. The space is 0.5 to 1 millimeter of thread extending out. But for 2002 on, it's 2 to 4 millimeters. Now, if you can't get that much adjustment, you have to look down here where you can add or subtract some of the cable linkage to make sure it's accurate. In the end, you really want to make sure that when you pull the cable all the way open, it bottoms out on the bottom here, so you know you're getting full acceleration. And when you let off, it sits on the idle screw, and there's free play in both the acceleration and deceleration cables. And that's really how it's done. It's a little weird, and I do encourage you to take a look at the manual to see how this is done, but that's how it's done in a nutshell. Installing the choke is relatively easy. I cleaned this up with a little bit of Scotch-Brite and alcohol, and you just slide it into that port. Now I'll use that little 90-degree aluminum bend to guide it in because I can't get my fingers in to actually manipulate that nylon nut. So instead I'll just use the wrench and gently thread this in, being careful for cross-threading. Now the biggest risk with this thing is over tightening it and pulling the threads right off that nylon nut. So take your time, and just when it's snug, it's right. You don't want to over tighten this thing, believe me. These vacuum tubes are the last thing that really need to go back onto the carburetor, so I'll just wiggle those onto this side. And I think the last thing is putting a vacuum cap on the top of the carb. And this will eliminate that silly little piece of pipe that I had on there, which was left over from the stock tank. So it'll be a much cleaner look and get some clutter out from underneath the tank itself. So I'll just hang up my auxiliary fuel bottle that I made, and I think a little bit more reading, and then I'll be ready to start the bike.
Hey, Carl, that don't look like riding gear.
Oh, it's not.
No, it's cold out, eh?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So, what are you doing?
I just come over to see what you're doing.
Oh, well, I'm working on the DR today. I just put the jet kit in, and I'm actually just about to fire it up.
Oh.
So, if you don't mind, I could use a hand. I got to get a little bit of gas in my remote tank and hook up the lines and stuff, and you can see maybe we can both die in here of asphyxiation.
That's quite the setup you have there, Dino.
Yeah, it's not too bad, eh? So, you feel like giving me a hand?
Sure.
All right. I guess all that's left is to try it, eh?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm gonna hit the choke there, and then pull the clutch in for me. Wow, actually sounds really good. Alright, well, before we pollute ourselves, yeah, that works
Awesome.
really good.
Yeah.
Like that started
Beautiful.
really nice.
Yes.
This bike was notorious for having hard cold starts. Carl already had the adjustable pilot screw in his, and his bike always started better on cold days than mine. That's really good considering how bloody cold out it is. Carl. So as I said, I can't really tune it because you need to get it out on the road to tune it, and I'm happy that it runs as good as it does.
Success.
Success, yeah, I think that's pretty good. So you can see this isn't a really hard project to do, especially when your buddy comes over in the end and gives you a hand to get it fueled. And I'm quite impressed with the remote fuel tank here. And in fact, I have a video on how to make one of these, and it's coming out this Saturday, I guess, right after this video. So if you're interested in, to know how to make your own remote fuel thing like that, there it is.
You might want to put your cover on your airbox too, Dino.
Ah, good point. Well, Carl, the one thing that I'm a little apprehensive about is ProCycle tells you to actually cut the top of the airbox out. And I'm not fussy on doing that. But they said that the other option is to leave the airbox cover off, which is what I'm going to do for now. But I have a little farkle in my head on a solution to help with that open airbox as well, because I don't like the fact it's so exposed to dirt with no pre-filter. So stick around for that one too, that's coming up. Alright, I guess we need to drain this out. The one thing I did know, and I'll tell you in the video on how to make this too, is The petcock being up here is a little bit challenging because now when we take the hose off, we have 4 feet of hose with fuel in it. I think I might put an additional small petcock down right at the bottom so I can shut it off and keep it the way it is. But anyway, for this video, I think we're done. I'd like to thank everybody for stopping by, and I hope this video helped you out. So I'm Dino, and Carl here is my buddy, and we got lots more DR stuff coming up in the new year. I can't wait to get riding. Like I say, it doesn't look like that. It's a riding coat. All right, bye for now.